I do not want children. And I've known this since my early 20s. But what I did not know was how much I've subconsciously sabotaged my sex life because I don't want children. Here's a quick story. When I was a teenager, I started dabbling in spirituality and faith, and I became religious. And at the time, I decided I was going to wait till marriage until I have sex, right? It made sense to me. And I never really considered what I wanted as far as if I wanted children or not, because you look around and everyone has children. I just assumed I was going to have a child, right? I didn't really consider what I wanted for myself. And so it made sense to me to wait until I was married, because then I'd inevitably have a child with the person I wanted. I wouldn't risk having a child with someone that I didn't want to have children with, right? Mistakes happen. Eventually, a few years later, in my early 20s, I transitioned away from that religious point in my life, and I started to question for myself what my values were, no longer basing it on the structured belief systems of religion. Now, throughout that process, I came to the realization that I don't actually want children. I don't have that compulsion, that drive, that instinctive internal desire to procreate. What I didn't realize is that throughout my previous few years being more religious and developing a certain belief system, I had subconsciously associated sex with having children, and I couldn't unlink them. There's obviously nothing wrong with associating sex to having children, right? It makes sense from a from a biological and evolutionary point of view. They should be linked, where one leads to the other. But as I'm sure you know, intimacy and sex and ultimately relationships are so much more than just for the purpose of procreating and having a child. Now, what I didn't realize until just recently is that even though I let go of the religious phase of my life more than 10 years ago, in the very back depth of my mind, I never let go of the direct link between sex and having children. And so what it led to is me, even to this day, developing a form of sexual anxiety, because I'm associating having sex with the strong likelihood and possibility of having a child. And the fact that I do not want children has caused that sexual anxiety to blossom. I've always been very selective and intentional in regards to my sex life. I've never been the type of person to just casually sleep around. Not that there's any judgment for me, for people that are like that, but that's never been me. But I'd be lying to you if I said that the reason for that was because of some high moral boundaries that I have for myself. The truth is, I've just always been hyper aware, keenly aware of how easy it is for mistakes to happen when it comes to sex. And I've just seen too many examples through my life of people, like friends, acquaintances, where they let the raw, passionate emotion and desire of sex get the best of them and lead them into situations that they didn't want to be in, which of course can lead to people taking actions that result in unexpected, unwanted, irreversible outcomes. And the idea of that scared me. It scared me to think of having a child that I didn't want or wasn't ready for, or with someone that I didn't want to be with. And there's too many unknowns and variables in there that you can't control. And it absolutely, it legitimately frightened me at the thought of just me having a child or getting someone pregnant. So it was only recently that I connected the dots, and I realized that my hesitancy and my cautiousness around sex, even within a committed relationship, was rooted in my desire to remain child-free. And that's an epiphany. That's something that I never put together. The problem with this form of sexual anxiety is that whenever I am sexually active, there's this dark cloud kind of looming over me where I'm overthinking, I'm kind of hyper vigilant, and I'm not able to relax and just be in the moment. And obviously, anxiety doesn't complement intimacy very well. In fact, on several occasions, I've woken up from a dream where I dreamt that I got my partner pregnant, and I've been I've been devastated. You know when you wake up and you had a dream and then you feel the emotions of that dream while you're awake? I felt depressed and disappointed in myself. And it's funny thinking about it, but in the moment I'm genuinely scared, pissed off, mad, devastated with myself over the idea that my partner got pregnant. Now, for most people, when they don't want children, common knowledge tells you to use contraception, right? Condoms, IUDs, birth control, whatever. And that sounds good. The problem is my over-analytical brain can't get past the reality of what the success rate is for all those things. For a lot of those, they have a 99.5% success rate. Sounds good, but that means there's a 0.5% failure rate. And as far as I'm concerned, a 1 in 200 chance of someone getting pregnant is a little bit too close for comfort for me. I'm not exactly happy with those odds. At different phases in my life, there would be periods where I feel very deeply that I'd rather completely go without sex than to take even a small chance of bringing an unwanted life into this world. I felt as though abstinence was the only foolproof method that I could trust. And sometimes that would span for months, sometimes even years. I don't know if I ever thought about it consciously, but I think in the back of my mind, the feeling was even a very small chance of something very bad happening is a very large risk to take. And it just didn't seem worth it sometimes. And even when I was sexually active, the feeling was like, man, be careful. Man, check the condom, make sure it didn't break. Don't let yourself don't give yourself too much to the moment, to the passion, to the enjoyment, because that's when mistakes are made. When people just give themselves to it and they're not paying attention, they're not being careful. That's the feeling that I had. And that's a major part of the sexual anxiety. It only takes but a drop in order for life to begin, for a mistake to happen. And as bad as it might sound calling it a mistake, that's what it is. It's a mistake. It's like my mind will race out of fear during an intimate moment, right? That's not, that kind of anxiety, it just bitters the experience for both people. And I think it's just that I've talked to so many people throughout my life who thought that they had this foolproof method, right? Like, yeah, I know how to avoid having a child. And then they have a child, then they have another child. And it doesn't take a lot of mistakes, right? Some people think that they have, like, their pull-out game is super strong, and then you make one mistake, or the condom breaks, or the IUD wasn't put in properly and it failed, or birth control wasn't taken consistently enough, or long enough, or whatever the situation is, right? Their method failed. And I've watched people's lives that they expected to go on this track get completely sidelined, and they went a completely different direction. Some people had to stop school, or they stopped pursuing a career, or they ended up being with someone that they didn't want to be with, right? They find themselves in situations that they didn't plan on and they weren't happy with, all because of one lapse of judgment during a heated moment of so-called passion and and pleasure. And if there's one thing I want to do in my life is to make sure that never happens to me. And I think the most frightening thing for me is that when I talk to people who didn't want a child, but then they had a child because of that, and I ask, like, why would you allow that to happen? And for them, it's just like, man, in the moment, I wasn't thinking about anything else. Sexual desire is such a powerful force. And I think what I realized is that, like, I'm not immune to it. Everybody has this instinctive desire as human beings, as a living thing, to engage in that level of intimacy. And for some people, when they're horny, when they're in that mood, they're willing to risk it all. They don't care about consequences. They don't care about anything except the pleasure in that moment. And because I know that I'm not immune to it, my hypervigilance was to avoid getting to that point of being in the moment. But of course, it's not really enjoyable unless you're in the moment. So that's where the challenge came from for me. And there's so many people I've come across in my life who are either single parents, or they're in a relationship that they don't feel comfortable leaving for the sake of the child, or they have to co-parent for the rest of their life with someone that they may have never even cared for because of one night, one moment. And I think that's something that I just could never allow myself to become. And that's not a knock on the people that are in those positions in their life, but I saw the examples of other people, and I decided I'm going to be determined to not have my life lead to that end. What I realized through all this is that it's not enough to be confident that you don't want children, and it's not enough to be responsible and use contraception, because I've done that. I've always done that, and I've never been able to relax. I've never been able to truly enjoy the moment. So what I realized I have to do is I need to get a vasectomy. It's the only way I'm going to feel at peace and truly be able to relax. And the reality is nowadays there's like no scalpel methods for vasectomies where it's not even invasive. It's quick, it's affordable, it's inexpensive. I think that's what I'm going to do. Well, I don't think, I'm going to do it. The reality is you can't stress about having children if you can't have children. It's taken me 33 years to realize this about myself. And what I'm constantly learning is that there's no point at which you truly understand yourself. Self-discovery spans our entire lives. And even then, you've never completed the mission, because every day that we live, we're constantly evolving. We're constantly adding on to ourselves. So we're constantly stepping into ourself anew. There's that saying that a man never steps into the same river twice, because it's always flowing, and our life experience is always flowing in the same way. I've been reconsidering the type of content I make on this channel, and I think the major decision is that I just want to be more open and vulnerable and honest, and talk to you the way I talk to a friend, because that's sort of what this is. I mean, every time I connect with somebody deeply, it's always because there's vulnerability being expressed, either from one side or from both sides, and I want to do that more. I want to see more vulnerability in the world. I think everyone feels more comfortable when vulnerability is expressed, and I figure I want to be the change that I want to see in the world. I think Gandhi said that. So I hope that this video brought value to somebody somehow, some way, probably to those who have considered being child-free. And as always, thank you for sitting here and listening to me, hanging out, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.